This is Byron.
Hello, Byron. My name is Ira Robinson, and I'm calling from late night in the Midlands. Michael Vera had to take the evening off tonight. His internet connection went really bad. He's got a lot of storms in his area. So I'm going to be doing your interview tonight, if you are all ready for it.
Yeah, I'm all ready for it. And again, what was your name again?
My name is Ira.
Hi, Ira.
We are
Thanks
live.
for doing the interview.
Oh, you bet. I've actually been looking really forward to this. I've read the Urantia book myself a few times, and I'm always fascinated by the subject. I know our listeners are really tuned in and listening and looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the topic. Before we get fully rolling, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and some, where your background is, where you're coming from, and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I guess we're on the air then.
Yes, sir, we are live.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure. Well, Ira, it's, again, great to be on the show, and a little bit about myself. I hail from the middle part of the country also. I'm from Cincinnati, and went to school in Chicago and other places, did graduate work also at University of California, Berkeley, and University of California, Santa Cruz. Most of my work was in history, and particularly history of religion, history of ideas, and philosophy. But I'm a generalist, and what made me a generalist, I really have no idea, but these days, I publish books, all kinds of nonfiction books, so you have to be kind of a general interest person to do that, and so I publish books for about the last 20 years, I published books in health and spirituality, a little bit in science and in politics, history, and lately I have been publishing books about the Urantia book, actually for now over 10 years. And, it's become a favorite subject for me. I've spent 40 years, believe it or not, studying the text and teaching and writing about it. And, I think it's endlessly fascinating. And so I'm happy to get into any topic that you'd like tonight.
I am definitely looking forward to it myself. I find the topic of the Urantia book in general really fascinating, like the story of how it came about and all of that. Just even that alone is really cool. What is Urantia and what does it mean?
Yeah, the word Urantia is a coined term. It was sort of coined by the celestial authors, and it means literally the name of our planet, planet Earth. Planet Earth is called Urantia, and it's funny that most people on the planet Urantia don't know the name of their own planet, but that is indeed the name according to this purported revelation. And by the way, the name Urantia is trademarked by the original Urantia Foundation, and they keep kind of a tight control on it, or they used to in any case. But that's what Urantia means. It's us, our planet.
And you said this was, now, like I said, I know the story behind it, but just for the listener's sake, you said that it was given by celestial beings. Can you go into the background of how it came about?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. It's a disputed story, but almost everybody agrees on certain outlines of it, which is that there was a contact that began sometime between 1910 and 1920 with some people in Chicago, and these were, fairly ordinary people. It was like a kind of an Edgar Cayce type of a contact, where there was somebody that would, in deep sleep, would speak, and strange things were coming through this guy. And eventually, this couple, actually, that it started out with a couple and a few other people, they found their way to a famous, well-known physician and psychiatrist named Dr. Bill Sadler, and he was actually trying to debunk the whole thing, and in fact, he had spent some time debunking other mediums, and he became, entranced by this thing. He just couldn't explain it, and he and his wife, Lena Sadler, who also was a physician, after about many years engagement with the phenomenon decided to kind of dive in with it, and soon thereafter, in early 1920s, these beings who were speaking through this guy said, "We're going to give you a book. We've been talking to you for all these years to prepare you, and the book will be a great revelation." So the text of the Urantia book began to, according to the story that I subscribe to, it appeared, it materialized. It was not channeled through anybody, and yes, they were speaking through what they call the sleeping subject, the contact person, who is sort of like an Edgar Cayce. They were speaking informally through him, but when the formal text came through, it would appear handwritten in various places, in this guy's bedroom, actually, or in a safe. So these papers would appear and disappear. And the way they did it was they produced a chapter at a time, and there are 196 chapters. It's a lot of chapters. They're called papers. They would produce these papers. They would appear completely done, handwritten, in perfect grammar. And a group that gathered around Dr. Sadler and his wife began to read the papers and feed questions to the celestials. They would feed questions to them through the sleeping subject. And then they would edit the paper. They, the celestials, would edit the paper, and they would produce a new draft. And you can imagine that this could take a long time, and it took over 20 years for them to go through the paper, 196 papers, have people read them, feed questions, and bring these papers forward. And it was by the time of World War II that they had accumulated the full text, or just before World War II, and they went through it again, and the Celestials did another round of editing, and it's not clear exactly how that occurred, but then by the end of the war, they had the completed text, and it took them a number of years to get it typeset and printed. And in fact, the Celestials told them to hold the text a little bit after the war, because everything was so unsettled in the world, and so they published it finally in 1995. So that's like a real short summary of the story, but other people have other stories.
So I noticed the timing with it too, with their publication of it was actually not long after the incident at Roswell, New Mexico, and the events that occurred there, as well as other alleged crashes that were during that same time period. Do you, and I know this probably may not be something that you think about often, but do you think that maybe there is a relation between the beings that crashed here, for instance, and these celestials?
Actually, it is something I do think about, and not real often, but I speak at UFO conferences, and just came back from the Contact in the Desert conference where I spoke about the Urantia book. But, I don't think there's a direct connection, but there was this tremendous interest in planet Earth, Urantia, particularly after World War II, because it had entered an incredibly dangerous phase, and so it's no accident that higher beings, celestial beings, were intervening, in various ways. And it's my view that the extraterrestrials work with the interdimensionals, to minister to us. However, we have a big problem, which is on our planet there's a split in the heavenly realms between sort of the dark forces and the light forces. So makes it pretty complicated. So so it's Roswell and all the other contacts, many that are, much lesser known, really have to do with the evolution of consciousness on this planet, and at a time when we can't handle it anymore. We need off-planet help. So it all comes together, and the Urantia book is, one of the central manifestations of that, in my view.
Do you think that maybe they have actually done this type of thing in other planets as well, or is this just something that we've had here?
This is something that, the revelation always occurs on other planets in a kind of a sort of a protocol that they have established for planets, and so they say there's a kind of a rhythm between evolution, natural evolution, just biological, genetic evolution, and evolution of consciousness. It just goes naturally. And then there's times when you kind of peak out and you can't really get anywhere in natural evolution. You need help from above. So any normal planet would evolve naturally, and then there would be times of off-planet divine intervention to move them forward. And but in our case, the interventions are all of them are highly are ad hoc interventions. They're because of the disturbances that we had right from the very beginning, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, most definitely. One other then maybe sideline question is, do you think that with the timing of things that it had to do with the fact that now we had access to and we're making use of nuclear energy with like nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants and so on and so forth, that maybe that was like a cue for them to know that we were ready for it, perhaps?
That was a cue for them that we were totally off the rails. That when you have technology of that sort, that you have an immature, really primitive civilization with weapons of that sort, then you definitely need off-planet help before you blow everything up.
Yeah, it's like giving a monkey a flamethrower.
Very much so.
It's not going to work out well for the forest around it, that's for sure.
So yeah, I mean, because we are loved and we are ministered to, and normal planets, this is done in an orderly way, but in a disordered planet like ours, it's done in an experimental ad hoc way with spectacular attempts to break through, and so far much of the interventions that have occurred have actually failed or have semi-failed. So we can dive into that at any point, but the listeners, just give them a kind of the capsule overview if they're new to this. A normal planet would have natural evolution up to a certain point when the indigenous sort of the tribes of the planet have populated the planet and have developed some very primitive technology, and they have languages, and they maybe have invented the wheel and things of that nature. But they know that there's a limit to evolution without outside intervention. It's just designed that way. And but what we should rather think of is how amazing natural evolution is. Natural evolution can really generate fantastic things without off-planet intervention, and that's why there's so many people around who think there really is no off-planet, forces. Because when you study evolution, it really looks self-sufficient. And but the broad expanse of things, if you look deeper, you see that, for example, right now, the natural evolution, political evolution on our planet is suicidal.
Oh, absolutely.
We're wrecking everything.
Absolutely true, right there. Yes.
And so, if we actually have loving divine parents, they would notice this and they would do everything they could to help us, but they don't want to make us dependent either. And that's the other side of the coin, which is when there's off-planet help, it's they're very cautious about it too. They're bold and they do it suddenly, but they're also very measured because if it's done too in a too dramatic way, it could blind the people. It could turn them into fanatics, or they could rebel against it. So there's a lot of wisdom that has to come to bear, and that's what we see in these great events that are narrated in the Urantia book. In particular, of course, the incarnation of Jesus, which is, compared to other planets, there's nothing like that that occurs. They have avatars like that, but they don't have an off-planet being of the order of Christ. It's extremely rare, and they, by the way, they don't have an avatar who gets killed either.
That's interesting.
Just none of these things happen on a normal. Just imagine the other planets. You can imagine planets have someone like Christ incarnating and they kill them. I mean, that's just got to be aberrational.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. That's interesting that you bring that up, because tonight, in the news section of the show, I went into how, as of tonight, we have a special conjunction that's taking place between Jupiter and Venus, and that it's the first time in 2,000 years that it's happened, and they think that it's actually what was the Star of Bethlehem during that time period. So rather interesting that you bring that up. Why don't we get into that a little bit, because I know that a lot of people are curious on that point alone. The papers in the Urantia book, they go really heavily into detail as far as the truth of the origins of the Christ and all of the things that are associated with him, and how we've kind of taken a way different path with things, I guess you could say. Why don't we go ahead and get into that? What do the papers say about the origins of him and that sort of thing?
Well, first, I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you're doing the interview, because you have read these papers, and it makes it much easier to talk about it. So anyway, yeah. So really the most important thing for people to know about the Urantia book is that it purports to have the angelic record of the life and teachings of Jesus. And not only does it provide this sort of almost like day-by-day narration that goes on for over 700 pages, but it tells you what he actually is in the universe and what is his status in the universe, which was, as you know, I wrote, this was an issue of great controversy in the early Christian centuries. Who was this guy? Was he the second person of the divine Trinity, or was he just a human, or was he kind of something in between?
Or was he even alive, or an allegory, and getting into the Gnostic texts and all of that? There was so much debate that was going on during that time period.
And certainly now too, and we have entire religions. Islam, for example, says he was just a prophet. He was not an incarnate, deity. And, there's just, New Age people don't think he was just a great guy. And, Buddhism kind of ignores him. So it's really kind of up for grabs. And, but the Urantia book gives you the most coherent picture I've ever seen. And I've actually studied theology in a seminary, and I've looked and haven't seen anything quite like this, and it basically states that the universe is a lot bigger than you think, and you have trillions of inhabited planets, and entire galaxies are inhabited. They have billions of planets on them, and so to have a high being overseeing all of that, trillions of inhabited planets is kind of a tough administration job. So what they do, what the great God does is delegate authority, and he distributes authority to local, if you will, local universes. And so what we have with Jesus, with Christ, is he is the chief being and deity for the local universe, and a local universe is defined as up to 10 million inhabited planets. And, it's like, well, only 10 million inhabited planets? That's all. But, there's trillions of them according to the Urantia book, and that fits what we now know about astronomy. But when the Urantia book was written, they didn't even know that there was more than one galaxy.
Yeah,
so it's kind of astounding that this book from the 1930s and 40s, told us that there were hundreds of millions of galaxies.
I take a look at the
gave you this this picture of an administration of a local universe. So he's the local universe son of God, and one of the most remarkable things about that is that it's not just him alone, but there's a female counterpart to him. Not Virgin Mary, not his mother of Mary, but a female consort known as Mother Spirit, and is what people think of as the Divine Mother, or the Divine Feminine. And so she is co-equal deity with Christ.
In the
and so
Gnostic
at
texts,
the head of our local universe is a divine couple. We know of him as Christ Michael, and she is known as Mother Spirit. She has other names. And so this Christ Michael is the person who incarnated on Urantia, according to the Urantia book.
I know in the Gnostic text, it refers to the feminine as the Sophia, just as an example as well for another name that they give for this this feminine spirit. For a great example of what you were discussing there about the local universe, you can take, for example, the Hubble telescope image that they did, just a small portion of a black spot in the sky. They focused the Hubble telescope on, and they thought that there was nothing there at all, but they left it running for, I believe it was up to 30 days, if I remember correctly. By the time that they got everything developed and figured out with it, just within this little small portion of the night sky that was considered to be dark and nothing there, they found thousands upon thousands of galaxies that were there just in the background radiation. And so, I mean, that's just one example of how vast our universe really is, and how much space there really is. I've always found that concept amazing. So when you were talking there, I can definitely see how this being could accomplish being in charge, I guess, of up to 10 million inhabited worlds. That'd be easily accomplished just even within that small portion of the night sky.
Yeah, I don't know about easily, but yeah, it's but we're speaking of beings who are incomprehensibly, omniscient, omnipresent, all-loving. They truly are God, but to the local group of inhabited planets. So, we think of God the Father, God the Mother as the original source, first source of all things, and of being far transcendent and far above all things, but also immanent inside of all things at the same time, and incomprehensibly great. But we can think also of Christ Michael and Mother Spirit as nearly really participating in that same divinity, but they do not have the absoluteness and the infinity of the first source of God the Father. They're not eternal beings, for example, whereas the Father and the eternal beings are eternal. And we might mention, Ira, that there is the evolutionary universes of billions of galaxies. They're evolving and growing. But according to the Urantia book, there's a central universe which is not growing and is not evolving. It's always existed from eternity, and it has perfect beings, eternal beings that live there, and it's very, very, very huge and large. And so think of it this way, that from this eternal universe, the central universe, also known as like the mother universe, out of it comes beings who are sent here, out here in space and time, for a big fun project, which is to deal with evolving beings. So someone like Christ or the Mother Spirit are beings who were created for that purpose at a finite point in time, a very, very long time ago, but were given and delegated many of the divine powers of the first source of God. So, that's kind of a long-winded reply.
We have two questions as far as clarification from our chat room is concerned, just to make sure of what you're referring to. And I have an understanding, but just to make sure that they have the understanding of it. When you're referring to Christ Michael, basically you're referring to the fact that the Archangel Michael, that we refer to as the Archangel Michael, is the Christ, and also that the central universe that you're speaking about, is that what would be considered to be heaven?
Yeah, first, well, I'll take the second question first. That the central universe is, you might say, the highest heaven, or the seventh heaven, so to speak. But there are many layers in the heavenly realms of higher worlds, and then even higher, and then higher dimensional worlds. So the central universe is beyond any possible description of a high heaven, and really only in the Urantia book is there any description that's even close to this description. That is one of the most stupendous things you could ever read, is what is the central universe like. It's really, really, really fun reading. Oh, and now I forgot the first question, Ira. What was it? It was about
it was in
Archangel Michael.
Right, yeah. Is that who you were referring to as the Christ Michael?
No, what the Urantia book authors, the celestial authors, do is they take particular names that we have from the Bible and other sources like that, mythical sources, and they redefine them. And so they took this name Michael. In Christianity, there's a couple of major archangels. Michael. Gabriel's another one. And the Urantia book kind of handpicked those names and gave them new identities. So Michael, the archangel, is the one that in sort of in the Bible and also in Milton's Paradise Lost, is the one who fights, who battles against Satan and Lucifer, and that really is one of the functions of Christ, of Jesus, of Christ, according to the Urantia book. So they redefine that name as Michael. But there actually is a real Archangel Michael also that is not, I don't believe is actually mentioned in the Urantia book, but we have transmissions from Archangel Michael through certain channels who are Urantia-oriented channels. So there really is also such an Archangel Michael. And by the way, the Archangel Gabriel in the Urantia book is redefined as a very high being in the local universe. He's actually the first child, so to speak, of Michael and Mother. I believe he's the very first being that they create. They sort of create offspring by fiat who have very high powers, and Gabriel is like, think of him as the CEO of the local universe. It's a big job, and Michael and Mother are sort of like the chairpersons of the board, so to speak, and they're the creator beings who love us and minister to us. But Gabriel, who was once Archangel Gabriel, is actually the chief administrator of the universe, and he's spoken many times in transmissions around the world to Urantia people.
That's pretty fascinating. One of the people in the chat room also clarified, I believe he said it's Michael of Nebadon that was referred to in the Urantia book as being the Christ Michael.
Yeah, correct. So the name of the local universe is Nebadon, and it's like who could make up a name like that? But anyway, that's the name of it. And so he's known. His title is Michael of Nebadon. He's got many titles. and that's one of his titles, Michael of Nebadon, and the mother, Divine Mother, the Mother Spirit, has also another name, which is Nebadonia. They took the name of the local universe and turned it into her name, Nebadonia, and she has that name because the whole expanse of the local universe is her. It's actually her body. And she is a person, a self-aware deity, but she also has an extent of her body, which is, just imagine it as this huge sphere that has, billions of suns and millions of planets. That's her body. So she's actually totally present in all space. So she's listening to us right now, in fact.
Hello.
Wave your hand.
Hopefully she finds the topic fascinating as well.
Yeah, I'm sure she does. She likes when we acknowledge her reality.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've thought over the years as far as like how things work, and I wonder how much this fits into the Urantia idea, is as we go through like different processes of evolving consciously, we go through different steps. So we can start off from the baseline of things. We understand what it's like to be an atom, consciously. Then we can move up and become like single-celled organisms, and we understand what it's there, experience all the things that are possible to experience there, and move up and up and up until you get to like the higher sentient creatures like us as human beings, or those that might be on other planets. Excuse me. And then you can move up as well from there and become like the consciousness of a planet, move up from there and become the consciousness of a solar system, and so on and so forth. And so maybe these beings that are referred to in the Urantia books, in the Urantia papers, are actually ones that have gone through this kind of a process before. Is that something that is possibly valid?
So let's take an example. You mean, say, for example, Nebadonia or Mother Spirit?
That'd be one example,
evolved
right?
Through those stages, is that what you mean?
Right, and has gone through all the process of being the underlings first, as going through the process of evolution that way, up until the point where she's now become this.
Yeah, that's a great and very pregnant question, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great messages of the Urantia book is that evolution is actually a divine process, and it is contained within divine beings, actually, within their consciousness, so that we can think of it this way, that the creators of our local universe, or any local universe, they start out with nothing. They, as I mentioned previously, they come out from the central universe. They're actually created, again, sort of by fiat, and they, as divine beings, and they come and they're kind of, sent. I don't know how they get here, but they're sent out to a kind of empty space. And working with special beings, they induce the creation of a great big nebula. And out of this nebula, suns cool and are spun off. And of course, from the suns come planets. So they are actually deeply, intimately involved at every level with physical creation. So you can say, in a sense, they're kind of incarnated in it. They are, particularly the Divine Mother is in it as her body evolving, so to speak. But the way they put it is that they have a kind of differentiation of function, that she is more in charge of matter and life, and he is in charge of the patterns of matter and life. He's sort of like the master pattern maker, but she's the one that actually, sort of is making it all cook, so to speak. And so they working together as one, they are, yes, I think this is, again, a very good question. They're really in it and of it. But, of course, they allow complexity to evolve out of it. When I say complex, it's just what you were talking about. It starts as, single cell, atoms, and even pre-atomic and quantum level. They start from there, and they induce it to evolve. So, in short answer, yes, they have, you might say, submitted themselves to all levels of consciousness, and that in fact is their job. And the much, much higher levels of consciousness that we're not even anywhere close to, they also are in charge. And so, they have planets in the local universe that are billions of years, they're billions of years old, way, 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 way ahead of us. We're a young planet. So they are working with, unbelievably advanced beings on their oldest planet. So they can contain, they hold the space for that too.
I think as well there are a lot of planets that are out there that have never encountered the things like we've encountered here, where, for instance, we've developed civilizations. We've gone, from the Stone Age up, and we keep getting devastated and thrown back into the Stone Age. So there are planets that are out there that may have never experienced this kind of thing. And so their society or their civilization is way older than ours, for example, just by the benefit of them not having gone through these different cataclysms that we've gone through.
Right. So, throughout the universe, there are, millions, billions of planets that are, completely, sort of enlightened and are in space, are traveling, are moving around, have lifespans of maybe thousands of years, have, incredible civilizations where everybody is sort of like, everybody's like, like Gandhi and Mother Teresa. They're all like saints. And that's because they've had a normal spiritual evolution and, didn't blow themselves back to the Stone Age like we are about to do. And,
Definitely.
for those of us interested in UFOs and ufology, it makes the Urantia book makes it much easier to understand how it is that we're being visited, who these beings off planet are, the material extraterrestrials, who they are. The Urantia book has this wonderful section of a couple of chapters, papers, about life on other planets, and it gives you an awful lot of detail about that. So, when I go to these UFO events, I try to share what the Urantia book says, and people are eager to know what it says about life on other planets because it's coming from a higher source than purportedly than most other sources.
It's definitely fascinating to me. We need to catch a break here real quick.
As what you might call holarchy. That is, they're not oppressive hierarchy, holistic hierarchy, and they're a loving hierarchy. And of course, it starts from the highest heaven, as we mentioned before. These are eternal beings who, they're super angels. They have origin from eternity, which is they have no birth. So these are eternal beings. You can call them the Eternals. And at the heart of all of that is in the Urantia book they use the term father, but they mean father, mother. So then they call this being the first source and center. And then there's it's important to make clear to folks that this is a Trinitarian picture. So there's a son that the father gives birth to, but of course the son is eternal, so there's actually no origin. But the son is equal in every way to the father, but has some different functions. And then there's a third person in the Divine Trinity who is known by various names, but we could call this the Spirit, Father, Son, Spirit, just like in Christian doctrine. And stemming from them are different types of beings. there are beings that are what they call Trinity origin angels, angels that are created by all three of them. Those are sort of the highest beings in the universe. They're of origin from the three great deities of the universe. So think of it as Trinity origin angels. And then there are angels, many orders who are of origin from the Father and the Son, or from the Father and the Spirit, or from the Son and the Spirit. So they're in the various permutations. And for example, Christ Michael is, in a sense, an angel because he's created being, but of course he's really more of a deity. But he stems directly from the Father and the Son, but not from the third person. And the Divine Mother, Mother Spirit, who is his consort, his wife, so to speak, she stems directly from the third person of the Trinity, who is the God, the Spirit. So you can see that they have different permutations, and they can create beings from them. And as we mentioned, in the local universe, there are orders of angels that descend from Michael and Mother, and they can be created by fiat from her, or by fiat from him, or from them, the two together, such as Gabriel is from the two together. And but the Mother Spirit creates most of the orders of angels directly from herself, such as the seraphim, which are the angels that are ministering directly to human beings, and then even under them, there's angels who are sort of less powerful, known as cherubim and cenobim. And they sort of work under seraphim. And everybody has a guardian seraphim. All of us do, but very few of us have a dedicated guardian seraphim. They tend to work. They're very brilliant beings. They can supervise 100 of us at the same time, no problem. So the sort of the lowest end of this holarchy or hierarchy are beings that are important to know about, who are known as Midway Angels, and they're the angels that come the very closest to us. They are just out of our visible range. They have sort of lower beings, so to speak, than the seraphim and the cherubim, and they're kind of quasi-human, actually. And so from them come sort of the legends of sort of leprechauns and various kinds of beings that are kind of nature spirits, because they really are inhabitants of our planet, whereas angels come and go here. But the Midway beings are actually the only residential angels that stay here almost forever. And I want to add, although it's on a slightly different subject, that the Midway angels, who are the residents of Urantia, planet Earth, are the origin of the 1111 phenomenon. So the 1111 time prompt that's their doing. If you want to get into that at some point. So in summary, you have very high Trinity origin beings that are, you might say, in charge of galaxies. And then you have many levels in between, I haven't barely covered it. And the next important level is the local universe angelic host, you might say. And then there's the planetary angels of various kinds. But the Urantia book has, a couple hundred pages going into this. Is quite a catalog of angelology.
Well, it's a big bureaucracy, so it needs a lot of paperwork to cover it all, right?
Well, it's funny you say that, because they actually keep records, and it's a really important function of angels is to record what's happening. And of course, that was kind of holograms or whatever they use, but they have a record of all things. It's like an Akashic record. And when we graduate to the next life, they have a record of our deeds and doings down here, and it's presented to us in our life review. But that's just one of many, dozens of jobs of angels. But yes, it is. It sounds bureaucratic when people come to the Urantia Book. They say, well, that's just this big bureaucracy of angels. Why should I? But actually, when you actually read it, it's delightful and charming to read about any one of these types of angels. You just can't believe the detail, and that nobody could ever make this up. It's just amazing. Just that section that's in part 1 and part 2 of the Urantia Book.
Well, I have a sideline question then for you in regards to this, because you touched on a couple of things that really cued me as far as this is concerned. My wife Jolene is a person who experienced a near-death experience, and during her experience, she was 4 years old when she had it. And when she crossed over to the other side and was there, she knew that there was a being that was there, but she couldn't see it because it was behind a veil of sorts. But it spoke to her. And while she was there, just kind of breaking down into a 30-second synopsis here, but while she was there, she was basically given the opportunity to choose everything that would happen in her life, and was shown essentially laid out like a book that she could turn the pages and see exactly what would be occurring in her life, who she'd meet, who she'd have in her life. All of this stuff was basically laid out right before her, and she remembers all of it to this day. So with the things that you're referring to here, was it maybe one of this order of angels that she was referring to or speaking to? And, maybe how does that relate?
Did you say, Ira, that she actually was shown things that were to come in her life, right?
Yes, absolutely, including me, for example. She was shown what I would look like, our life together, our children, the fact that they weren't hers, but, what they looked like. Every bit of it basically was laid out right before her. Wow,
that's pretty remarkable. I've been studying near-death experiences. I don't think I've even heard of one that foretold the entire life of a person. The Urantia Book is ambiguous on the subject of foreknowledge. It definitely doesn't convey the idea that angels know everything we're going to do, who we're going to marry, and it definitely doesn't convey that at all. And it actually seems to imply that even God the Father doesn't know in detail everything that's going to happen. He certainly has the big picture of the beginning and the end of things, but she gives us free will to literally choose these things right in the moment, and it's not foreknown and not predestined. So it's a kind of probably the most, I think for me personally, the most difficult philosophic and theological problem that comes out of the Urantia Book is, how do we interpret that? I don't have an answer, but we've had these supplemental transmissions that I've referred to since the Urantia Book. And I don't know if you're aware, Ira, about that. Do you know about the so-called teaching mission and what that is?
I've heard about it, but I've never actually looked into it, no.
I'm the primary publisher of books from that new material, and we can maybe talk about some of that later, but in that new material, which are transmitted to Urantia students, literally this is literal channeling. It's not trans-channeling, but it's transmitted to them telepathically. People have asked questions about foreknowledge and, do angels know what we're going to do and where we're going to go? It's not clearly, I haven't squared it yet. So anyway, that's quite a remarkable experience that Jolene, your wife, had. We do know, of course, that in near-death experiences, people see their past. And, that's well established, not just by the Urantia Book, but in many sources, that there is an Akashic record of all things that have happened. And but the Urantia Book makes that a little bit more personal. It states that they're personal beings that are doing this. It's not like the impersonal law of karma that's kind of recording everything. It's actual beings who are there loving you, nurturing you, and recording you.
Sort of like a good version of the NSA, perhaps.
Hey, that's pretty good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, they really are listening in, and it's doing benign surveillance. And, of course, they do intervene on occasion. They have to be sort of commanded by higher angels to do certain things, but they also have flexibility to take initiatives on their own.
Okay, see, that's one question I was going to ask is when I was younger, when I was 8 years old, I had an experience, and I wonder if this is perhaps what you're referring to there. I had an experience where I was running across the street to go to a park, and my family was standing outside talking, and a car was driving down the road very fast. I mean, it was zooming like crazy. And the car got very close to me, and it was almost like this streak of nothingness is how I can refer to it, came out of nowhere, and it literally flung me backwards into the waiting arms of my mom, who was just getting ready to voice a scream because she saw that the car was coming. And it was like out of nowhere. I was not injured in any way, shape, or form. The impact of this being hitting me didn't injure me at all, but it was like I literally got picked up and flung, a good 25 feet away from where this car was. So is that maybe an example of one of these angels basically coming to the rescue, for instance?
Absolutely. I mean, it seems there are no doubt, and they're witnesses to the incredible experience that you had. And I've heard many of these cases too, because I keep my eyes open for them, because I have a certain personal affection for the type of angel that does that. Again, I mentioned they're known as midwayer angels. They're midwayers because they're midway between humans and seraphim. They're sort of midway, and that means that they are so close to us that they can physically do things, whereas a seraphim cannot physically lift you and move you. But these angels called midwayers can do that, and they're the only angel that has physical hands-on contact with us. So I would surmise that a midwayer came in and saved you. And what we know about them and all beings of this sort is that they're basically outside of space and time, and so they can sort of see things. They can almost like in slow motion, and so they can act at the speed of light. So they can see a car is coming and can intervene in time. Doesn't mean they foresee the future, but they see what's happening with tremendous granularity. So I would guess it's our friends the midwayers who saved you. What a great story that is.
It was definitely an experience to remember. It has quote unquote impacted me for the past 40 years. That's for sure. Well, one question that I had then, as far as this whole Urantia idea is concerned and the things that are within it, you could say that most of the religions on the planet don't really get along too well with the Urantia papers, correct?
They don't even know about it, really, because, think of Buddhism or Islam or Hinduism, and, it's not been really disseminated well. But as far as Christians, some Christians do, some seminaries do. But it's a whole other story as to why the Urantia book has not been disseminated. It is not known by them very well. It's kind of a scandal, really, that it's not known to them. So far, the great clash between the Urantia book and everybody else has not come yet, although we believe that the Vatican really does know about it, and it's rumored that Pope Francis had access to it, and in where he came from in Argentina, he knew about Urantia study groups because it's well known in Latin America, it turns out. So, but obviously, if he thought it was important, he would bring it to the world's attention.
Well, I wonder maybe
so like all the rest, they buried it and they don't want to talk about it. And when I was in theology school, I had decent credentials to be in graduate school, but I could not find any professor that would work with me on a dissertation on the Urantia book. So I actually left graduate school. I was a young man and wanted to do that, and I couldn't find anybody to work with. They just had, number one, they hadn't heard of it. Number two, when they looked at it, they just couldn't deal with it. So in a way, this thing is far ahead of its time, and number one. Number two, it has not had very good advocates out there yet. And number three, I think it's been actively suppressed.
I do too. I think that as well myself. Whenever I speak about it to anybody, they're like, "What? I've never heard of that." And I'm like, "How could you have never heard of that? You follow the same circles that I do. How could you have never run across this in your past?" It's very, very confusing. One question that came in from the chat in regards to this, and this might get us into the topic of us and our human history in regards to what these beings have said about Urantia. Has this information been revealed anytime in the past, or is this like the first revelation that this has ever been? And maybe how does that actually relate to what we as human beings have gone through since our inception?
Well, good. I'm glad we're getting to that. That's really important for your listeners to know about sort of the prehistory teachings of the Urantia book, and that things that I'm talking about have been revealed in the past. However, the records are very garbled because of the chaos of our history. We don't have good records of these encounters, but we do have, for example, in the Bible, the story, the entire prehistory that the Urantia book talks about is contained in sort of mythic form in Genesis and other parts of the Bible, going all the way back to the first visitation 500,000 years ago. And if you like, we can get into that. That was the initial divine intervention here. That is the beginning of this story. But that the records of that are lost, pretty much entirely, with the exception of a few references to the Nephilim in in the Bible, and the Elohim, and a few other terms like that. And the Tower of Babel and some other things. It's totally garbled and convoluted. But the second great visitation, the story of Adam and Eve, is got a little bit more detail in the Bible and also in the Quran and other places. So that is known about in mythic form. And then the third great epochal event is almost completely unknown. It's the advent of a being 2000 BC named Melchizedek, who initiated the line of the Hebrews. And of course, we all know about Jesus. That's the fourth great revelation, and then the Urantia book purports to be the fifth of these. So it's a very difficult story to tell. And when I get out and give talks on this, people are like kind of wide-eyed because it's like all of this is so new to them. For example, the ancient astronaut idea, which is purveyed, mainly out of Sitchin, Zecharia Sitchin. That has been put out there. That's well known. But that is, in my view, a completely incorrect interpretation of the Sumerian tablets. And the Urantia book, I think, has a much better story of prehistory than that, if you'd like to get into that.
Yeah, most certainly. I would love to. The subject of us as human beings and our history is one that's always really fascinated me, and the fact that we've really been lied to all along about what it means to be human, and the origins of us, I think, is such an important thing. If we don't understand our origins, we can't understand, the who and what we are in this day and age. That's just how I feel. And by the way, anybody that wants to call in, you're more than welcome to. We will take calls. It's 260-494-3937. So anyways, yes, most definitely. Please get into what we have gone through.
Yeah, I want to maybe contextualize it a little bit in relationship to Sitchin, because his work is so popular on this subject. And over the years, I've begun to come to believe that Sitchin is may possibly be a disinformation agent, because the Urantia book has a similar timeline to his, saying about 500,000 years ago, these beings descended here and came here with a particular project in mind. He has the same timeline, 500,000 years ago, and in fact, he states they came down in the Persian Gulf area, and so does the Urantia book. So that's very interesting. And he also states that there was a rebellion that occurred, a so-called slave rebellion that occurred about 200,000 years ago against these Anunnaki, right? And the Urantia book states that there indeed was a rebellion about 200,000 years ago, but it's a whole different story. And what Sitchin states is that the Anunnaki came here and eventually, bred a slave race out of humans and oppressed us and they did genetic experiments that were very questionable experiments to create slaves and that sort of thing, and had this very mundane project on Earth. But and so this is a picture of humans and our origin, which is very depressing. The Urantia picture of our origin is very exalted. It says we're sons and daughters of God. We participate in sonship and daughtership with divine, and so we are loved. And so the beings who descended here 500,000 years ago came out of love to support our evolution. And yes, they aborted the whole project. That's a whole other story. But just think about it this way, Ira, that who you are, your identity has to do with where you're from and where you're going. And to me, there are dark forces that are trying to control our identity, where we're from and where we're going. And wouldn't they want to plant the idea that we're just a slave race, that we're created by a gene splice from an exploitative extraterrestrial race? What a terribly dismal picture of humanity.
Well, when I think of the psychology that happens to a person when they have been raised, for instance, to think that they are an animal or to think that they're nothing, that's exactly how they act. That's exactly how they're going to turn out. The origin of you, that baseline understanding of yourself, has a heavy influence on what you do and accomplish from that point forward. So if you're told that you are a race that has been enslaved in the past, you're going to think in terms like that. The psychology of the race itself, the psychology of the species is going to be with that mindset in there, with that in the genetic makeup almost of who you are. So you're going to act a lot more like that enslaved race, as opposed to if you were to be raised up thinking that you were amazing and wonderful and powerful and all this stuff. It's a vastly different way of thinking, and it's a vastly different way that you're going to turn out as a person as well as a species.
And it's amazing that you can we can have a scenario in which this picture of humanity is dominant in the field of prehistory studies. Of course, it's not academic. It's outside of academia. They don't pay any attention to this. But if you go to, the Contact in the Desert, really the biggest UFO conference in the world, where I was last month, it's all about that. It's all about, we're a slave race, and the ancient astronauts came here, and they exploited us and used us, and there were some benign influences, but mainly, we're kind of nobodies, and we have to liberate ourselves. But what it creates is like a slave mentality, that where you have to be a rebel, you have to rise up and fight, and in a sense they're right that, we are oppressed, but we have, again, this divine origin. And the Urantia book and other sources teach that we are indwelled by a part of God, a spark of the divine, of the pure divinity. And we are destined to greatness, as Jesus said. You shall do greater things than I did. And that's the message we need to get across. And so this history that we're talking about is essential for that. But, that said, there's some truth in this view as well, that because the Urantia book also tells us that we fell into a great oppression here, because our immediate planetary supervisors went to the dark side. And that is the sort of the terrible secret of the Urantia book, that people don't seem to know, they don't read deeply into it, which is that this is, in a sense, a prison planet, in that our immediate angelic host, most of it went dark and followed Lucifer. And so we can get into that if you like.
Sure, most definitely. Go ahead and get as much of that story out as you can, because again, this is important information to understand if you are trying to understand why we are seeing the things that we're seeing today. It even relates to all of that in the prehistory. We've been carrying it in our very makeup ever since.
So let me also preface that, Ira, by saying that what I'm talking about is in videos you can find of mine on YouTube and also at my website, evolving-souls.org. And there, I had a conference recently where I introduced these ideas, and other speakers did, in some depth with slides and charts and everything. And there are other tools at my website that people can get more background. Of course, you can get the Urantia book itself. This first great visitation to our planet is what happens on any planet when evolution, natural evolution, as I said earlier, when natural evolution reaches its highest point that it can. We're talking about biological, genetic, and cultural consciousness evolution. Comes a long way, a very long way, over a couple of billion years, to the hominid level, and then from hominids you have real human beings, primitive human beings, who then immediately are indwelt by divine forces. They literally, their minds receive an augmentation once they're sort of defined as humans. And so what we think of as human is what evolved by 1 million years ago and had these endowments of free will and rationality. They just didn't have technology, and they hadn't evolved. So they evolved for about 500,000 years, according to the Urantia account. And so 500,000 years ago, so you were talking 1 million, span of 1 million years, so 500,000 years ago was a great and grand visitation, the first great visitation of 100 avatar beings who were specially selected from higher worlds and for whom bodies were constructed. And they then sort of materialized on a location near the present-day Persian Gulf with a charter, with a program of building a capital city for the whole planet. So again, Sitchin says that this visitation occurred in the Persian Gulf. Well, this says it too. But this was actually, according to the Urantia book, is beings who come here with a curriculum to teach us and help us. And, back then, of course, the primitive indigenous humans didn't have much. For example, they had hundreds and hundreds of languages. They didn't have writing. They didn't have math. They didn't have lots of tools. They didn't know about plumbing. They didn't know about animal husbandry. They didn't know much about health. And so this group of 100 avatars, 50 men, 50 women, had this training from a higher world to incarnate and create this city, and then invite in the tribes from around the area who would be trained and then sent out like emissaries. So this great capital city was called Dalmatia, and Dalmatia was built up over several 100,000 years, and they had not just these avatars, but they were overseen by unseen, invisible beings who were kind of in charge. So the avatars are not exactly in charge, they're on the ground, but their superiors are invisible, they're angelic. And so in the angelic host of the planet were led by the what we call the resident governor general, really kind of the chief general manager of the planet. And this being is a being named Caligastia. So, this is an intricate story, and, again, you can get more on my website or Urantia book itself, but what is important to know is that the so-called devil, according to Christian myth, turns out to be this being, Caligastia, who went to the dark side, which can happens in about 1 in a million planets, and swung with him his administration and influenced all the humans on the ground and the avatars on the ground. And so this was a rebellion known as the Lucifer Rebellion. The Lucifer Rebellion is one of the 3 or 4 major teachings of the Urantia book that people need to know, because this was the influence of a high angel named Lucifer, his lieutenant named Satan, who went to planets in the local group and influenced them to go into rebellion against the universe government. I know it sounds like science fiction. I'm going to stop there for a moment, Ira, and let you ask questions because it's a lot to take in.
Well, so far so good. Everybody is understanding it, I believe. We haven't had anybody kind of going, wait, what? That kind of thing. But I guess one thing that I would say is with relation to this event, you said that it was like 1 in a million planets. I guess you could say that we were the lucky, quote unquote, ones to get hit with this kind of thing. But one question that I would have, and I don't remember for sure if it goes into this in Urantia or not, but is it the case where when something like this occurs that it is actually in the end beneficial for the sentient species that is there, because of the fact that we would have to fight harder, learn better, learn the lessons more, I guess you could say, so that in the end it's actually a little bit more beneficial to have to fight for our divinity as opposed to just giving it.
Wonderful point, Ira. Ira, I'm gonna simply pick up a different phone. Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up a different phone. This phone, I thought the battery would go a little bit longer, but I'm going to pick up the main phone here and so put you down and pick up the other phone.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Second. Ira, you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'll shut that over phone off. Still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So the great thing about this story is that when you have an adversity of this kind as a human race, you are a special category in the universe, and those who come from what they call rebellion planets are very precious persons in the greater universe, because you've had all of these challenges that people on normal planets don't have. You might think of them as, sort of bourgeois, living in the suburbs, and they have life easy. But we're like in the inner city where everybody's shooting at one another, and so you become, we're more streetwise, so to speak, and we have to develop discernment skills, somewhat beyond people from normal planets. So then in the higher worlds, in the afterlife, we're a pretty special breed, and we're given more advanced assignments because we have learned to have faith in the midst of chaos. whereas they had visible avatar beings on their planet throughout their history. We have not. They had benign angelic hierarchy on their planet. We have not. And so, you know, we're the tough guys. So it's a great point. And, you know, in the far distant future, people coming from our planet get a special title. That they're the sort of those who have overcome the most. And so, you know, we should not despair about coming from a rebellion planet. We should, in a way, celebrate. It's ironic, but we can celebrate that fact and have a positive framing of this problem, especially now because, you know, we've evolved through hellacious conditions to a relatively, you know, high civilization compared to, you know, even 100 years ago. Yes, we're warlike. Yes, we have diseases. You know, yes, we're, you know, primitive compared to extraterrestrials. But now we can really rise above this and look at it. And that's one reason the Urantia book came in this period, because we're ready to, you know, hear the whole story.
Yeah,
so
I think
a big part of the whole story is the Lucifer rebellion.
I think that one of the ways that I look at things is that we as a species, we've evolved really far as the physical things are concerned, but at this point in time, we really do need to evolve a lot more spiritually to be able to progress forward, I guess you could say. You know, we've become kind of unbalanced in that way.
We are, you know, without a doubt, there's so many aberrations that there is not a holistic kind of evolution. You know, we're really good in some areas and we're terrible in other areas. You know, particularly, you know, we're very good in technology and science, and we're far ahead in those areas. If we compare it to our ethical and our moral development, it's far behind. And you know, on a normal planet, all of these things would evolve together as a whole evolution. So we have this bizarre patchwork of aberrations. You know, we have, you know, completely primitive Stone Age people living on this planet, and then we have people who are, you know, really advanced, almost, you know, like avatars. You know, we have the complete expanse. And how are you gonna weave all of that together? You know, and you know, it's really my view, looking at this, is that there's really only way to put it all together, and that's with another great intervention. And so, I haven't mentioned it, but it's the view of many of Urantia students, particularly more esoteric Urantia students, that there's going to be a new avatar appearance here that is actually been announced in a variety of venues. It's called the Magisterial Mission, where there will be a divine son, a divine being, so to speak, from the mother universe, from the central universe, we're told, will incarnate in our lifetimes to weave all of this together, because it's really beyond what any human could do.
Is that what's sometimes referred to as the Maitreya, I think is the word, Maitreya?
Yeah, it's really roughly the same idea.
Okay.
So it's not the second coming of Jesus, which is also discussed in the Urantia book, but it's like a second coming of a being of the order related to Jesus. But this is a being whose job is not a creator. He's not a creator. He's not our creator, but he's more as a judge. But he's a benign judge. He's a merciful presence. And, you know, the creator, Michael, Jesus, Christ Michael, and Mother, they can't be the judge of their own children. That has to be another personality who has a different perspective. So this Maitreya being, if you will, is a magistrate. It's like a divine magistrate. So he will terminate this era, and he will sort of put things in their right place, because he has, you know, basically perfect discernment of what's going on. We've had a number of interactions with him through channels, and I have published a book called Healing a Broken World. Came out a few years ago, which is some of his statements as to what his program is. And, various channels have slightly different versions, but we all have been told he's present and he is soon to incarnate here to take the reins, so to speak.
Gotcha. I understand. Yep. Okay. So, with relation to the past, then one question that I would have that comes to my mind is, since we're on this rebellion planet, I guess, do other rebellion planets also have this imbalance towards the physical, or are there some rebellion planets that perhaps have more of an imbalance towards the spiritual? Have they gone in the other direction as far as that's concerned? Or is it more that these divine beings, I guess, become so fascinated with the physical that they push it as much as they can?
Great question. I don't think I mentioned that we're told that there were 37 rebellion planets. We're one of 37 rebellion planets in the local group of inhabited planets that chose to follow Lucifer. Now, in the local group of planets that he was the head of, there were over 600 inhabited planets, so only 5% of them went rebel. And so on these, we have just a little bit of information about these rebellion planets. We have a whole chapter in the Urantia book on one of them, actually. And it's just as chaotic and just as uneven as this planet. Each one has got its own mess. And they're all uneven. I don't think there's any cases where they're very hyper-spiritual. I think it's mainly that they're just warlike. And because, it's sort of like if your parents were fighting all the time and were pathological, then the children will become warlike and pathological. So the planet itself is a mess. And so each of these planets have received very special ministry from off-planet beings. We don't know much about it. We do know that none of them had Christ incarnating there. Only we did. He came to basically the worst of the 37.
I was just about ready to ask what made us special.
It says here and there, there's some one or two places that are worse than this, but basically we just really had complete pandemonium. And so, being this high, loving, and merciful creator being, he, of course, would choose the worst to minister to. Just like he commanded us to, minister to the least of us. If you minister to the least of us, you're serving me. So, of course, he's doing it too. He came to a place that, was such a mess, such a dark place that they killed him. And, probably wasn't in the original plan, but, he was subject to human will. And, but he incarnated here as an example to all planets in his local universe, but especially as a teaching to the rebellion planets, because now they have the story of their creator who came and took on the appearance of human and made himself subject to the vicissitudes of a human life. And, what greater story of love and mercy can you think of? And so, but beyond that, there are minor revelations about life on these planets in the new transmissions that I mentioned, known as the teaching mission. And by the way, if people want to look that up, the archives of these transmissions is called TM Archives. TM, as it stands for teaching mission, tmarchives.com. And also another one called Daynal, DAYNAL.org. These are two sites that have these transcripts that run into 20,000 pages. And you can go in there and search on keywords and find, the most amazing embellishments of the teachings of the Urantia book.
That is a lot of information.
It's a lot. It's like, I just recently turned 60, and I decided to, spend the rest of my life trying to study this and bring it out.
Well, listen, Byron, we're going to go ahead and take our last break here real quick, and it'll be a short one. So when we come back, let's get more into that topic, as well as some other things that have come up in the chat room, as well as far as questions for you are concerned. We will be right back, folks. Stick around. You are listening to Late Night in the Midlands. I am here with Byron Belitsos. I'm sorry, I totally mispronounce your last name all the time.
It's
Belitsos, correct?
Byron Belitsos.
Belitsos. Okay, I kept saying Belitsos, and I knew that wasn't quite correct. So, okay, so we will be right back, and I promise I will stop butchering his name. Questions that came in from the chat room for you.
Okay.
One of them is in regards to the afterlife. What does the Urantia papers have to say about the afterlife?
Urantia book is one of the best sources of knowledge of what happens after death. It states that it's an ascension cosmology rather than a reincarnation system. We don't reincarnate back to this planet, although there is a technical case of reincarnation that is not very important, really. So this is an ascension cosmology, or what they call the ascension scheme. And what we're doing here is creating souls that will, and in a way it's the whole purpose of space and time evolution, is to generate hearty beings who choose the good and the true and the beautiful, who then, after death, have a soul that is worthy of survival, so that you can live on in eternal life. And, this is in the Urantia book. It's not, they give you your little harp and you float in the clouds and play your harp. It's actually civilizations in these higher worlds. These are actual worlds. They're planets with populations, but they're in another higher dimension. But in these dimensions, these worlds appear to be physical, and in fact they are material, but they're higher materials. And so you're literally standing on a sphere in a higher world, living a life and interacting with people from other planets, actually, from not just from here, but they're ascended from other planets. And it's sort of like a class moving through high school and into college. You've graduated, so to speak, into college now, and it's a different composition of students, and they have more advanced classes. And in fact, it is like being in class. Universe is one big school, but it's not an oppressive educational school regime. It's an enlightened school. It's a school of learning about love and learning about science and learning about mysteries. And we are in a kind of school forever, and we're always learning, growing, and eventually, in the end of the story, is you ascend various levels until you are invited into the central universe that we talked about before. You're invited to meet the eternal beings in the central universe, and that's a very big jump from here. So you have to qualify for it, and you have to be like 100 times more enlightened than Buddha to qualify for that. And we will, in the distant future, all of us will qualify, that is, if we do survive and choose to survive. And so we have this very, very high destiny, and it's really one of the 2 or 3 chief teachings of the Urantia book, is that we do have this high destiny in the afterlife to become eternal beings and utterly enlightened beings in an eternal life.
Well, that's pretty fascinating, I think. With the other universes, I mean, if you think about it, in another universe, for example, physics can work completely differently. We wouldn't be constrained by the physics of this universe, because the physics over there could be set up in a completely different way, and things could act and react, in non-Newtonian ways. For instance, there might be a completely different organization of laws there, just as one example. One question that I would have then that's, I guess, tied to that then is, do we need to have duality in all of these other ascended realms, like we do here, in order to understand the difference between, like you can't understand love without first understanding the other side of things, or at least not be exposed to the entirety of love without having an understanding of what's going on the other side as well. You can't see the darkness without the light, and so on and so forth, So does that also come as a requirement with these other realms, perhaps?
Yes, because you're still in evolution. You're in higher worlds, but they're really still in space and time, but they're just in a higher dimension of space and time, so to speak. They are still evolving. These worlds are all evolutionary, and not until you get to this central universe, far distant times, do you get beyond duality. In other words, in the central universe, there really is no contrasting shadow, really of evil. You're now far, far, far beyond that in perfect worlds with perfect beings. And these beings have never known what it's like to be experiential, to actually be having to make these choices between evil and good. They have no idea what that is, and that's one of the purposes of the universe, is that the eternal beings learn from us. We're their teachers. They crave to know what it's like to be experiential. And of course, we crave to know what it's like to be non-dual, beyond good and evil, beyond all of this struggle. And so there's this grand marriage that is orchestrated in the central universe from what we'll call the ascending humans, the ascenders, and the eternals. That's an advanced topic in the Urantia book, but a very thrilling one, Ira.
I find the topic really fascinating myself. It's one that I think about a lot. What would it be like to live in a place that didn't have to have that kind of dualism with it? And I know that a lot of people, especially in the New Age front of things, they like to try to push the idea that we don't have to have the duality, or that the duality doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. But I don't really ever ascribe to that idea because, I've experienced life. So, the one thing I've always understood as far as the creators are concerned is that the reason why we were created is to have the experiences. So it falls right in line with what you were saying there, that we were actually created to have the experiences, but actually to teach them through these experiences.
And one thing maybe to add to that, I think we're at the end of our time, but it's an advanced concept about which I'm writing a book, which if people sign up my website, they'll see this book. It's on the very subject of what is the soul and who is sort of the oversoul. Because the Urantia book has this incredible notion that there's a part of God that receives all of our experience into himself. And all the experiential beings on all the planets, this part of God is like the Akashic record of all of their lives. And as they evolve, he evolves. And as they perfect, he perfects. And at the far end of this whole experiment, everyone in the space-time universes has become enlightened. And when that happens, this part of God becomes a person. He personalizes. He's like a record of everything, but then suddenly he becomes a person, and this person personifies all of us in himself as the personification of all the struggles of evolution. So, when we could leave your listeners with that idea.
We still have actually about 20 minutes if you still want to go with it. Yeah.
Okay, well then we can keep going. All right.
Yeah, I was going to say we still have plenty of time if you wanted to cover more in there if you so desire. I definitely I love that concept. The one thing that I've thought over the years, and maybe this kind of goes into it a little bit, is that like, for example, our universe was created out of a being that had evolved itself to the point where it has become like everything. It has has experienced everything that it possibly can. And so then to be able to experience more, it shatters itself into many, many, hundreds of trillions upon trillions of different atoms to go through the whole experience again and experience all things anew, basically, as if it had never experienced it before. Or perhaps, like I said, setting up a whole new universe of different laws that would give a whole new stem of different experiences.
Well, in a way, that is this. Those are theological concepts. Because we say that God is the creator, and that meaning that God was alone and decided to create beings, and in this case, of course, it's trillions of beings. So why did God do that? Well, so that God could see what it's like to be finite rather than infinite, and to kind of have to fight your way back, so to speak. And this is not done in a kind of mechanistic way. It's done in a loving way. It's a loving way creating children that she loves and nurtures to evolve and come back to him. And each one is like a window on things that God does not have. I mean, God is not literally me experiencing my experience. I'm having the experience, and God is like watching the movie of my experience, so to speak, and is watching everybody having these experiences. And, God doesn't waste anything. God is conserving all the experiences. As I mentioned, God is actually got a part of God, of God's self, that is a summation of everything that God is witnessing in us. And it's kind of an unusual idea, but it makes sense because, God doesn't stand off in the skies indifferent to us. That's the idea of deism rather than theism. Deism
Right.
says God is indifferent, sort of sets us in motion, and then he backs off and does something else. He doesn't care about us. But we're theism states that God is engaged in every moment with us, cares, and is our source and our destiny. So there you go.
And it does fall pretty much right within what I was describing, just kind of like in a little bit of a different way. I find it to be really interesting to think about, in the middle of the night, I guess you could say, the thought that, there's this being who's kind of eating popcorn, watching the movie of my life, But the one thing that I could add to that, I guess, is the fact that there has never in the existence of anything ever been somebody that's like me that has gone through the exact experiences that I've gone through. So I, as this individual person that I am a completely unique individual, and I can contribute then through that uniqueness to this thing that some people refer to as being God or the creator or however you want to refer to it.
Therein, Ira, we can increasingly see how well you know the Urantia book, because that is another great teaching of the Urantia book, is the uniqueness of each person. And this uniqueness is unique in all of eternity, in all realms. You are totally unique. We are not uniform in our personality, and we are uniform in other respects. But yes, we not only have this uniqueness, but we have freedom within it. So we're given the Urantia book calls it personality. In psychology, we mean something different by personality. We mean behavior, but in the Urantia book, personality is actually like an entity that is bestowed on you, kind of bestowed on protoplasm, like on the infant in the womb. This is the personhood is a bestowal from the Father, and this is unique in all eternity. What a precious thing. And that's why we say we're made in the image of God, but each of us is a different image from God. So, like you said, previously, it's like God fragments himself into, trillions of little pieces, and each one's special, and each one's like kind of a fractal in a way. And this is part of the divine, sort of like the mathematics of the whole thing, because if you multiply the numbers of unique perspectives infinitely, then this gives God like an infinite movie show that he can sit back and eat his popcorn and watch all this thing and have this unique knowledge that only we have. So we're giving this incredible contribution. Now, if we decided to get with the program and develop virtues and ethics and morals, meaning we decide to align with God, with our Creator, then all the better, because he can watch a very pleasant movie of us growing and becoming healthy and spiritual. But we have the freedom to not do that. And in fact, the angels have the freedom to not do that, which is why we could have had the Lucifer rebellion. It's hard to believe that angels can go dark, but they too have personhood. They too have free will. They too are unique, and they can get off the rails. And of course, so can we. But that's the whole point: is that God is not mechanical. God loves us to have freedom and come back to Him because we want to.
I think that the idea of free will is absolutely essential, because through that free will, we do come up with these unique experiences that then add to that ultimate formation of God,
Right, so because, the notion of the human soul, which I'm finishing my book on, is that every unique person chooses uniquely what they're going to do, and each thing that they experience it's like every time you have an experience, the universe hits the save button. It saves it as your soul. It's in you, and that's why when we speak of people having a life review in a near-death experience, as we mentioned before, there's a complete record of your life. Now, whether this is the record that the angel has, or is it the record that's in your soul, I don't know. I think they're probably the same thing. And but imagine the richness of this. It's sort of like having a great novel by Dostoevsky, where you have all these different characters, and each character is really, really unique. And what a rich novel it turns out to be. You have all these strange characters kind of growing up together. And so, the divine person wants to have absolute variety, absolute diversity. That's why each of us is created unique and not like robots. Because that's what's beautiful. The beauty is in the fact that there is uniqueness and difference. But when you unify all of this far-flung uniqueness and diversity, when you unify it, that's beautiful. And that's what God supplies the unification of it, the unity of it. But we supply the diversity, through our uniqueness, through our freedom. Right. So not to get too philosophical here, Ira.
Well, I love philosophy myself. Sorry, my tongue decided to twist there for a moment. I love that subject myself, but yeah, that's definitely a long topic in and of itself. One question that I had come in from the chat regarding the rebellion is with the subjects that we were just discussing here, would the Celestials actually be considered to be angry against the rebellion, these ones that have gone dark, based upon the fact that they have caused these different unique experiences to occur, and with what you were saying earlier, the fact that we are, I guess, sort of ultimately going to be better off because of what we've gone through?
So the question is, literally, were they angry about the situation that
right.
we stepped into?
Yeah.
Angry. It's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I mean, these are the so-called fallen angels, and it's in Christianity, it's in Islam that there were these fallen angels, and yes, they have sort of dark emotions. You might think of them as being angry, yes, indeed, and they I'm remiss because I have not mentioned the fact that we have been told, this is post-Urantia book, we've been told in the teaching mission, the new channelings, we've been told that all of those so-called dark angels, fallen angels, have been judged. They've been adjudicated. Literally, they had a court case in heaven, and in the court case, they were adjudicated and they were removed from planet Earth. And the date for that is 1987. Now, this is disputed, around the edges. We don't have the clarity that we have in the Urantia book on this, but it seems to me correct that this occurred, and sort of the status of these so-called fallen angels is that they were taken to a kind of a prison world, and they could choose rehabilitation. And so many, we're told most of them did, but those who did not, that remained defiant, were given the option to choose their own death. And we're told that Lucifer, Satan, and Caligastia all chose sort of to snuff themselves out rather than get rehabilitated. They were rebels to the end. And but the way they tell this is that these are beings that had dark emotions. These are beings whose belief system stated that God is a myth. In other words, the loving God is a myth, and the universe is not built around love. The universe is built around will. It's built around self-assertion. It has to do with freedom and doing what you will, and rather than conforming to the love and the will of God. So, if you reject all of that, you're going to become a pretty distorted personality. So, yes to that question, you might even think of them as having been angry and perverse and exploitative.
Very
in fact,
interesting.
That's what Jesus was pointing out in certain passages.
I've noticed that too as well. I used to be very religious myself. I was on the path to become a Baptist pastor myself, and so it's interesting some of the side passages that are contained within like different sections of the New Testament that show that exact thinking. That right along those lines. One other question that came from the chat room then is in relation to what you were discussing earlier about the events that occurred there in our prehistory. So with the idea of the Nephilim, what could you say, or what does the Urantia papers say is in regards to the Nephilim, and are they still in existence today based upon the pathway of history that we've taken?
Well, Sitchin says that they're more or less the Anunnaki coming from, the 12th planet. The Urantia book states that the Nephilim are the race. It's a little convoluted, actually, because they had a rebellion, right? So there were these avatar beings I mentioned that they were incarnate in human bodies 500,000 years ago. They were able to. They had the ability to reproduce. They were not supposed to reproduce, but they had the ability to do it. And they also had the ability to interbreed with the indigenous humans. And so that's who the Nephilim are. The Nephilim were kind of a new race that arose after the Lucifer rebellion, going back 200,000 years ago, and this race was of origin from the members of the staff. They're known as, by the way, the prince's staff, the planetary prince staff, the 100 incarnate beings. They were able to reproduce, and the race that they created is known as, it has a name, it's called the Nodites. they spread out in the Mesopotamia area, and they are the group that are referred to as the Nephilim, and they are one of the ancestor races of the Sumerians. They had higher attributes. However, they were warlike and inclined to the dark. So they created quite a civilization, very, very ancient civilization, very, very, very ancient, with writing, with mathematics, with some technology, and they were renegade. And we didn't mention that there was another race that was created by Adam and Eve, and they came much later, 37,000 years ago. That's a huge subject, and we're almost at the end, but they also spawned a race on our planet, and that's told about in the Bible. And the mix of that race and the race of the Nodites are the true ancestors of civilization. And what we call the Sumerians emerge out of nowhere with all of this language, writing, math, astronomy. It comes from these ancestor races. It's probably worth saying, Ira, that we have some evidence, significant evidence, archaeological evidence of some of this, which I was involved with. And the Urantia book states that there truly was an Adam and Eve. It sounds kind of bizarre, but there really was. It sounds like a crazy myth from the Bible, but it says it was these beings that came much, much later, like I said, 37,000 years ago, to uplift us biologically by interbreeding with us. It states that they incarnated here as a couple, Adam and Eve, and their mission was to upgrade our genetics. As far out as it sounds, it states that they were stationed on the island of Cyprus in the eastern Mediterranean, and I know you know the story, Ira, from the Urantia book, that they also aborted their mission because the angelic host of the planet was dark and basically interfered with and led them to make very bad decisions and cause their mission to be cut short and defaulted. But not before they had created a new race of their own children. And that race interbred, and those stories come down to us in the myths of the Middle East, in Sumeria mainly, but also other myths in very ancient Vedic myth and other stories that are totally garbled. So that's an understanding the whole entire scheme of the Urantia book, which really admittedly takes months and years. It is important to know that there were two great dispensations. The first one, 500,000 years. The second, 37,000 years. That actually left behind beings that we think of as sort of like the ancient astronauts. And it is my belief that this is the solution to the ancient astronaut problem. And by the way, the main guy on Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, the guy named Tsoukalos.
Yes.
Giorgio. Yeah. I spoke with him at Contact in the Desert about this. And, I asked him if he could put this on the History Channel. I asked him face to face. And first thing he said was, I have a Urantia book. I've read it. And I said, well, hey, maybe you should start talking about it. And just at that point, I got interrupted. There was a line of about 200 people trying to talk to him. But I gave him some of my materials, including some of the books I've mentioned and a video of myself that you can find on YouTube that introduces this. I gave him. I should mention before we close that there is couple of new books that I've published and edited, which are the transmissions from Christ Michael and Mother Spirit. And the series is called The Adventure of Being Human. Anyway, I gave him copies of that, and so let's see, maybe we'll get this on the History Channel.
That would be really interesting. I think that it would be a really good telling, a different version of the story. And I think that, the fact that we have these different versions of our history is really important. We have to understand all of them. We really need to look into all of them because we don't know. We don't know where we came from or where we're going and all of this kind of stuff. And again, like I was saying towards the beginning of things, I think that it's absolutely essential to know and understand what it is to be us so that we can progress forward from here. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to give you the floor to be able to get out anything that you want to get out, any websites that you want to give to the people. We will have you linked up on the website, lnmradionetwork.com, with the archive of this show, all of the websites that you give. We will have you linked up there so that people can find you very easily. But I want to go ahead and give you the floor to get out anything that you'd like to get out.
Thank you, Ira. So first of all, thank you to you, Ira, for the terrific questions and for being with me through all of this. And you and I have had a little adventure. All of my materials relevant to the Urantia book are at the one website I've given you, which is evolving-souls, SOULS.org. On YouTube, we have a channel which is Evolving Souls Community. And our most recent books I just mentioned, it's The Adventure of Being Human, and there's 2 books in that series. Just look under Adventure of Being Human. And previous book is called, I'm getting fatigued. I can't remember the name of our books. Healing a Broken World. And there are other books. There's a very wonderful book by Donna D'Angelo, close colleague of mine. It's called Teach Us to Love. Teach Us to Love by Donna D'Angelo, which is an introduction to the core spiritual teachings of the Urantia book. And it is a beautiful book. There are other titles. There's one called The Secret Revelation, which is about the book of Revelation in the Bible compared to the prophecies of the Urantia book. It's called The Secret Revelation by Stella Religa and myself. So those are the main ones. There's another one that's just out of print. It's probably our best book, and we're going to print it again, but you can find it used. It's called The Center Within. The Center Within, Lessons from the Heart of the Urantia Revelation. That was actually a kind of a big seller, and we sold out of it. And that has the core lessons as well. And one more, I've written a book called One World Democracy. One World Democracy is derived from this teaching. Also, it states that the whole world will be united. We will reform the United Nations. The United Nations will become a democracy. We'll be able to elect representatives to the United Nations. How do you like that? And that's in our future. Rather than a top-down New World Order, we're going to have a bottom-up One World Democracy. So you can look for that book, which I co-authored. I'm the principal author. And my forthcoming book, which is called Soul Making Dynamics. It's not on Amazon yet, will be soon. And that is an introduction to the teachings about the soul, the afterlife, and the Urantia book. And look for that to come out rather soon. I think that's probably about it, Ira. Everyone, please get yourself a Urantia book. They're really inexpensive. They're subsidized by wealthy people to make them really inexpensive. You can also download it free as an ebook. It's in various publications. The best one to get is the one that's got an index. So look for the Urantia book with an index. It's less than $20. It should be $50. Get the text and put it on your shelf and consider it to be like an encyclopedia. You don't just sit down and read the encyclopedia, but you want to look something up. You want to look up the life of Jesus. pull it down and look it up. Look up anything in his life. You're not going to believe it if you haven't seen it. And if you love Jesus, you're not going to believe how much detail there is about his life. Any one story in the Bible, which is a paragraph, can be 10 pages in the Urantia book. So if you always wondered about the miracles, or about his family, or the apostles, or the resurrection, for example, the Urantia book says that yes, indeed, he did resurrect, really true resurrection, but not just a few times. He had 19 resurrection appearances, and that is some of the most sublime reading you can do. What did Jesus say in his resurrection when he appeared? In one case, he appeared to a group of about 100 women. What did he say when he appeared in Alexandria, Egypt? These are things that didn't make it into the Bible. And, just that alone, to get the Urantia book and read the biography of Jesus is the thing I recommend the most. It's the most important knowledge to have, is the life of Jesus and what he taught, which is all there in the text.
Absolutely wonderful. I love that idea too, definitely. There's so much that's missing out of his life, just it goes from the time that he was 12 years old to nothing, till he was like 30. So, there's a whole gap of time there that never gets talked about.
All those missing years are recounted in the Urantia book. It's fascinating to know what he did. It states that he was actually a householder. His father had died. His father, Joseph, died. But there were 8 siblings, and he was their father. He was the oldest Jewish son, so he actually had the experience of raising children on this earth. And so all of those out there who are parents, just know that Jesus was a parent. It wasn't his biological children, it was his siblings.
And most of the time we need to have the patience of Job to deal with the children we have.
Yeah, at least back then they didn't have cell phones and iPads.
Exactly.
Probably a little easier for Jesus.
Byron, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you tonight. I really appreciate you coming on here to Late Night in the Midlands and dealing with me instead of Michael tonight. But I'm glad that he took the night off, because I definitely wanted to have this conversation with you. So.
Well, what a great pleasure, Ira, and hope we'll do it again sometime. And tell Michael I'd love to meet him.
Definitely
again,
will.
Thanks for having me on.
Definitely will. Thank you so much, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, let's do. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Bye-bye. You said that it was given by celestial beings. Can you go into the background of how it came about?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. It's a disputed story, but almost everybody agrees on certain outlines of it, which is that there was a contact that began sometime between 1910 and 1920 with some people in Chicago, and these were fairly ordinary people. It was like a kind of an Edgar Cayce type of a contact, where there was somebody that would, in deep sleep, would speak, and strange things were coming through this guy. And eventually, this couple, actually, that it started out with a couple and a few other people, they found their way to a famous, well-known physician and psychiatrist named Dr. Bill Sadler, and he was actually trying to debunk the whole thing, and in fact he had spent some time debunking other mediums. And he became, entranced by this thing. He just couldn't explain it, and he and his wife, Lena Sadler, who also was a physician, after about many years engagement with the phenomenon, decided to kind of dive in with it, and soon thereafter, in early 1920s, these beings who were speaking through this guy said, "We're going to give you a book. We've been talking to you for all these years to prepare you, and the book will be a great revelation." So the text of the Urantia book began to, according to the story that I subscribe to, it appeared, it materialized. It was not channeled through anybody. And yes, they were speaking through what they call the sleeping subject, the contact person, who is sort of like an Edgar Cayce. They were speaking informally through him, but when the formal text came through, it would appear handwritten in various places, in this guy's bedroom, actually, or in a safe. So these papers would appear and disappear. And the way they did it was they produced a chapter at a time, and there are 196 chapters. It's a lot of chapters. They're called papers. They would produce these papers. They would appear completely done, handwritten, in perfect grammar. And a group that gathered around Dr. Sadler and his wife began to read the papers and feed questions to the celestials. They would feed questions to them through the sleeping subject. And then they would edit the paper. They, the celestials, would edit the paper, and they would produce a new draft. And you can imagine that this could take a long time, and it took over 20 years for them to go through the paper, 196 papers, have people read them, feed questions, and bring these papers forward. And it was by the time of World War II that they had accumulated the full text, or just before World War II, and they went through it again. And the Celestials did another. They're very cautious about it too. They're bold and they do it suddenly, but they're also very measured because if it's done too in a too dramatic way, it could blind the people. It could turn them into fanatics, or they could rebel against it. So there's a lot of wisdom that has to come to bear, and that's what we see in these great events that are narrated in the Urantia book. In particular, of course, the incarnation of Jesus, which is, compared to other planets, there's nothing like that occurs. They have avatars like that, but they don't have an off-planet being of the order of Christ. It's extremely rare, and they, by the way, they don't have an avatar who gets killed either.
That's interesting.
Just none of these things happen on a normal. Just imagine the other planets. You can imagine planets have someone like Christ incarnating and they kill them. I mean, that's just got to be aberrational.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. That's interesting that you bring that up, because tonight, in the news section of the show, I went into how, as of tonight, we have a special conjunction that's taking place between Jupiter and Venus, and that it's the first time in 2,000 years that it's happened, and they think that it's actually what was the Star of Bethlehem during that time period. So rather interesting that you bring that up. Why don't we get into that a little bit, because I know that a lot of people are curious on that point alone. The papers in the Urantia book, they go really heavily into detail as far as the truth of the origins of the Christ and all of the things that are associated with him, and how we've kind of taken a way different path with things, I guess you could say. Why don't we go ahead and get into that? What do the papers say about the origins of him and that sort of thing?
Well, first, I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you're doing the interview, because you have read these papers, and it makes it much easier to talk about it. So anyway, yeah. So really the most important thing for people to know about the Urantia book is that it purports to have the angelic record of the life and teachings of Jesus. And not only does it provide this sort of almost like day-by-day narration that goes on for over 700 pages, but it tells you what he actually is in the universe and what is his status in the universe, which was, as you know, I wrote, this was an issue of great controversy in the early Christian centuries. Who was this guy? Was he the second person of the Divine Trinity, or was he just a human, or was he kind of something in between?
Or was he even alive, or an allegory, and getting into the Gnostic texts and all of that. There was so much debate that was going on during that time period.
And certainly now too. And we have entire religions. Islam, for example, says he was just a prophet. He was not an incarnate, deity. And there's This is Byron.
Hello, Byron. My name is Ira Robinson, and I'm calling from late night in the Midlands. Michael Vera had to take the evening off tonight. His internet connection went really bad. He's got a lot of storms in his area. So I'm going to be doing your interview tonight, if you are all ready for it.
Yeah, I'm all ready for it. And again, what was your name again?
My name is Ira.
Hi, Ira.
We are
Thanks
live.
for doing the interview.
Oh, you bet. I've actually been looking really forward to this. I've read the Urantia book myself a few times, and I'm always fascinated by the subject. I know our listeners are really tuned in and listening and looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the topic. Before we get fully rolling, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and some, where your background is, where you're coming from, and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I guess we're on the air then.
Yes, sir, we are live.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure. Well, Ira, it's, again, great to be on the show, and a little bit about myself. I hail from the middle part of the country also. I'm from Cincinnati, and went to school in Chicago and other places, did graduate work also at University of California, Berkeley, and University of California, Santa Cruz. Most of my work was in history, and particularly history of religion, history of ideas, and philosophy. But I'm a generalist, and what made me a generalist, I really have no idea. But these days, I publish books, all kinds of nonfiction books. So you have to be kind of a general interest person to do that. And so I publish books in. For about the last 20 years, I published books in health and spirituality, a little bit in science and in politics, history. And lately, I have been publishing books about the Urantia book, actually for now over 10 years. And, it's become a favorite subject for me. I've spent 40 years, believe it or not, studying the text and teaching and writing about it. And, I think it's endlessly fascinating. And so I'm happy to get into any topic that you'd like tonight.
I am definitely looking forward to it myself. I find the topic of the Urantia book in general really fascinating, like the story of how it came about and all of that. Just even that alone is really cool. What is Urantia and what does it mean?
Yeah, the word Urantia is a coined term. It was sort of coined by the celestial authors, and it means literally the name of our planet, planet Earth. Planet Earth is called Urantia, and it's funny that most people on the planet Urantia don't know the name of their own planet, but that is indeed the name according to this purported revelation. And by the way, the name Urantia is trademarked by the original Urantia Foundation, and they keep kind of a tight control on it, or they used to in any case. But that's what Urantia means. It's us, our planet.
And you said this was, now, like I said, I know the story behind it, but just for the listener's sake.
Our ad hoc interventions there because of the disturbances that we had right from the very beginning, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, most definitely. One other then maybe sideline question is, do you think that with the timing of things that it had to do with the fact that now we had access to and we're making use of nuclear energy with nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants and so on and so forth, that maybe that was like a cue for them to know that we were ready for it, perhaps?
That was a cue for them that we were totally off the rails, that when you have technology of that sort, that you have an immature, really primitive civilization with weapons of that sort, then you definitely need off-planet help before you blow everything up.
Yeah, it's like giving a monkey a flamethrower.
Very much so.
It's not going to work out well for the forest around it, that's for sure.
So yeah, I mean, because we are loved and we are ministered to, and normal planets, this is done in an orderly way, but in a disordered planet like ours, it's done in an experimental ad hoc way with spectacular attempts to break through, and so far much of the interventions that have occurred have actually failed or have semi-failed. So we can dive into that at any point, but the listeners, just give them a kind of the capsule overview if they're new to this. A normal planet would have natural evolution up to a certain point when the indigenous sort of the tribes of the planet have populated the planet and have developed some very primitive technology, and they have languages, and they maybe have invented the wheel and things of that nature. But they know that there's a limit to evolution without outside intervention. It's just designed that way. And but what we should rather think of is how amazing natural evolution is. Natural evolution can really generate fantastic things without off-planet intervention, and that's why there's so many people around who think there really is no off-planet, forces. Because when you study evolution, it really looks self-sufficient. And but the broad expanse of things, if you look deeper, you see that, for example, right now, the natural evolution, political evolution on our planet is suicidal.
Oh, absolutely.
We're wrecking everything.
Absolutely true, right there. Yes.
And so, if we actually have loving divine parents, they would notice this and they would do everything they could to help us, but they don't want to make us dependent either. And that's the other side of the coin, which is when there's off-planet help, it's, the round of editing, and it's not clear exactly how that occurred, but then by the end of the war, they had the completed text, and it took them a number of years to get it typeset and printed. And in fact, the Celestials told them to hold the text a little bit after the war because, everything was so unsettled in the world. And so they published it finally in 1995. So that's like a real short summary of the story. But other people have other stories.
So I noticed the timing with it too, with their publication of it was actually not long after the incident at Roswell, New Mexico, and the events that occurred there, as well as other alleged crashes that were during that same time period. Do you, and I know this probably may not be something that you think about often, but do you think that maybe there is a relation between the beings that crashed here, for instance, and these celestials?
Actually, it is something I do think about, and not real often, but I speak at UFO conferences, and just came back from the Contact in the Desert conference where I spoke about the Urantia book. But, I don't think there's a direct connection, but there was this tremendous interest in planet Earth, Urantia, particularly after World War II, because it had entered an incredibly dangerous phase, and so it's no accident that higher beings, celestial beings, were intervening, in various ways. And it's my view that the extraterrestrials work with the interdimensionals, to minister to us. However, we have a big problem, which is on our planet there's a split in the heavenly realms between sort of the dark forces and the light forces. So makes it pretty complicated. So, so it's Roswell and all the other, contacts, many that are, much lesser known, really have to do with the evolution of consciousness on this planet, and at a time when we can't handle it anymore. We need off-planet help. So it all comes together, and the Urantia book is, one of the central manifestations of that, in my view.
Do you think that maybe they have actually done this type of thing in other planets as well, or is this just something that we've had here?
This is something that, the revelation always occurs on other planets in a kind of a sort of a protocol that they have established for planets. And so they say there's a kind of a rhythm between evolution, natural evolution, just biological, genetic evolution, and evolution of consciousness. It just goes naturally. And then there's times when you kind of peak out and you can't really get anywhere in natural evolution. You need help from above. So any normal planet would evolve naturally, and then there would be times of off-planet divine intervention to move them forward. But in our case, the interventions are all of them